Hey guys, thanks so much for joining us in this next installment of our Let's Talk About series. We really appreciate all of your support and your positive comments and feedback over the last few months about this series. If you're interested in supporting us a bit more directly, you can buy some of our merch that we have in the bottom bar below this video. Additionally, if there's any other kinds of merch that you'd like to see, definitely let us know in the comments and we'll do what we can for you guys. Again, we really appreciate your support. So today we're going to be talking about optics, and optics are, one of the things that most airsoft players will sort of navigate towards. I mean, your first airsoft gun, you may not have an optic on it, like a red dot or something. More often than not, you'll just have your iron sights, right? And pretty quickly, you're going to move to having some sort of optic, either a red dot sight, a magnified scope, or something like that. So we did a video previously on optics, but what we want to do today is have a bit of more of a deep dive into the topic. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of optics, sort of our experience with them. As well, we're going to talk about, what you should look for as well if you're looking at getting an optic, or perhaps you don't like the one you have and you're trying to swap up or upgrade. So I know, Chris, definitely for yourself, I know for me, we started by using our iron sights, right?
Yeah, for sure. That's all that came on my rifle when I bought it. And honestly, I didn't feel like I needed anything else.
Yeah.
I don't use a scope when I hunt. So I just figured that was, that was the way to go.
Yeah.
But I don't think it is the way to go anymore.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the issues that you see, especially on like airsoft iron sights compared to like a real steel iron sight, is firstly, depending on your airsoft gun, your iron sights might just be completely off, right? And you don't have a way to adjust them.
Yeah, for sure. And even some of the knockoff iron sights or whatever may come on your rifle aren't as good a quality. They might not be metal. They might not have the same aperture, that kind of thing, as a real steel counterpart. And also on a real steel rifle, you're going to be accurate to your iron sights. Whereas with airsoft, as we know, I mean, we're lucky to have a 200-foot effective range. So,
yeah. And I mean, to be clear, like, there's nothing wrong with using iron sights. I know there's lots of guys in our community who that's what they swear by, that's what they run. And, they're really effective with them because they train with their iron sights, which I think is a key piece. But, when you think about airsoft too, there's the fashion show element, right? We're buying these sights because they look really cool, they're interesting. And so generally speaking, we're going to gravitate towards the red dot sights. So let's talk a little bit first about the red dot sight. So what is the appeal for you when you're using a red dot sight? Like, why would you switch from iron sights? What are the benefits?
Well, an iron sight, by nature, you need to line up two things, right? You need to line up your front sight with your back sight, whether that's an aperture like on an AR, or whether it's a wedge like on an AK, or whatever the case may be. So with a red dot, you've only got one thing to line up. So for me, that makes it a lot quicker to both, transition targets or get my target right away.
Yeah. And
it also lets you see a little bit more around, right? Like I find a lot of people, especially with iron sights, they get really in behind their rifle, and then it's harder to identify targets. It's harder to see what's actually going on out there.
Yeah, and there's a tendency too when you're shooting with irons to you close that eye to really be able to get a good picture of through your aperture.
Definitely. Which
in another video we're going to be talking about how you should be shooting with both eyes open, and it's a lot harder. It's not impossible, but it's a lot harder to do that with iron sights than it is with the red dot sight.
Definitely.
So there's the piece around the the speed. There's a piece around, of course, like the coolness factor of it as well. So, what are some of the things? So you mentioned when we talk about the red dot sight, it's easier to aim. So you want to talk a little bit about how that works?
Well, like we touched on with the iron sights, you literally have to line up two things, and with a red dot, you only have to line up one. So it's just a dot on a screen, and that's it. So as long as you are directly behind that red dot sight, whatever you're pointing that dot at, that's where your rifle should hit if it's zero, right? So there's a few factors that go into this. I mean, you talk about different sights with different levels of parallax, which is basically if you're not directly behind the sight, if you're either left or right from it, how much that dot is actually going to move. And on really good, real steel sights, there's should be zero parallax. So you can look at that from any angle, and where that dot is actually true. Whereas on some of the cheaper airsoft replicas, you might get a small amount of parallax, which for us, like we talked about with range being, sub 200 feet, it's not that big of a deal.
That's right, yeah.
Right.
And talking about sort of the replicas, I mean, you can get really cheap red dots, and you can get some more expensive replicas. And my experience has definitely been like you get what you pay for, right? Both in terms of like quality and all this kind of stuff. But also a really important factor with the red dot is your adjustment, right? You have to be able to adjust it, right?
Definitely. So yeah, you need to have both left and right, so windage, and you need to have your elevation up and down. And that is really important because, if you've ever tinkered with your airsoft rifle, sometimes you just can't get that BB to go straight out of the barrel. So you got to be able to move that dot to your intended target.
That's right. And also the simple fact is if you put, one of the concepts that, especially in real steel shooting, but that does carry over in airsoft is what's called co-witnessing your sights, which is if you have a red dot sight and you have backup irons, which by the way you should, because your red dot is going to die at some point. And it likely will be during a game because that's how Murphy's Law works.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that your dot is aligned to where your point of aim will be with your irons as well. And that's if you can't adjust your red dot, like you get a really cheap one and it doesn't have the full range of adjustments, you might not be able to do that, right?
Definitely. And to talk about what makes a good replica good is, you want to look for brightness, because a lot of them can be super dull or super bright, and super bright is not always great either, because then you get that distortion where you put your dot on a target and you can't actually see the target because your dot is it's like looking at Christmas lights when you're squinting.
Yeah.
Right. And also you want a dot sight that's going to take a common battery. Right, like I've had them that take like a $20 watch battery that you can only find every second Sunday at Walmart. Like,
that's right.
Like, you stick to a common battery is going to make your life easier, and carry spare batteries for that site.
I know I get a lot of questions on YouTube from you guys about what kind of sight I have on my rifle, and it is, I've got it back there. It's a replica Trigicon SRS, and part of the reason why I got this, there's a few reasons we'll talk about later about why I got it, but in particular, it uses one AA battery. Yeah. It's like the most common battery. If you don't have one in your house right now, I would be absolutely flabbergasted. And they're very inexpensive. So you can carry, like I always have a couple in my bag at a game because you never know when it's going to go down, right?
Yeah, for sure. I do the same. Like I've got a replica aim point, and it takes I can't remember the number, but it takes a watch battery, and I just keep a spare in my vert grip, right? Yep. Or in my pocket.
Yeah, for sure.
It only takes a second.
So red dot sights, we've talked a little bit. They're obviously like the cool guy factor for sure. But they are more effective. You are much faster at acquiring targets. Like you said, you're only, you're not getting very much parallax, and it doesn't really. If you have you got a good red dot, and at our ranges, it's not a huge factor anyway. Yeah. The other piece is, if you're shooting both eyes open, you only get the information of the dot in one eye, right? Because unlike your irons, right, where, you have to align everything, like you said, there's only one point of aim. So wherever I see that dot, I know that's where it should be, right? Yeah. So I think for red dots, we got a good understanding. The next piece is, of course, magnified optics, right? So you got guys who decide to run, well, there's different varieties of magnified optics. You've got your fixed power magnifier, so like a 4x magnifier or a 10x magnifier.
Generally a flip up.
Yeah, a flip up as well. You can run with your red dot.
Yeah.
Or you can have a variable power magnifier that goes from 4x to, I don't know, like 24x or, depending how much money you want to spend, really.
Definitely.
And I know what's really interesting in particular with you is that you used to run a magnifier and you don't anymore. So if you wouldn't mind talking first about what drew you to the magnifier in the first place.
So I liked the idea of a magnifier because I liked the idea of being able to identify exactly where my BBs were going a little better, because, we play a lot in the woods and a lot around wooded structures. So sometimes, it might just be a little branch, or you might be hitting just a little piece of cover around somebody and you can't exactly see it. I had a four times flip down aim point replica, and I liked it for a little while, but what I found myself doing was actually canting my rifle and using my magnifier to sort of ID stuff and then switching back over. I didn't find myself actually using it very, very much the way it was intended to. Because I found 4 times even wasn't enough to warrant taking my hand off of the trigger, basically flipping it down and then reacquiring. And I might have felt different if it was an actual aim point or EOTech magnifier, but for me to spend $600 on an actual aim point and then another 600 plus on a
flip down.
Yeah. Not worth it for me.
So, some of the appeal with magnifiers for sure, and I mean, we have a couple of guys on our team who ran longer range rifles. And to be clear, like when we talk about longer range, we're talking like 80 meters, like 100 meters maximum, really. And we're talking like maximum range total. Like their effective range is sub 80 meters still, right? Yeah. So for, if you're an Imperial kind of guy, like we're talking like 300 feet, like on the absolute maximum range, and actually engaging targets, you're talking about like, what, like 150, like 160? Maybe. Effective engagement. But they use magnifiers, and, there's definitely a benefit with the magnifier of, number one, being able to sort of look at the field and sort of figure out where stuff is, right, in sort of more of a recon fashion, let's call it. And yeah, absolutely being able to take those longer range shots if your rifle is effective at those ranges. And we get lots of comments when we say stuff like this, when we say, airsoft rifles are not that effective out past like 150 feet. And guys are like, oh yeah, well my stock gun is shooting effectively past 150. Yeah. And that's just not the case, right?
No, it might be effective if you're shooting at a static target with no wind, but especially where we are in the world, there's always wind. I mean, most of our fields, even if you can see somebody, say if you can see somebody at 300 feet, they're moving, or like I said, there's going to be a gust of wind, so your chances of hitting somebody at that range, very, very low.
And I mean, even guys who are like, have devoted a lot of their income to creating a long-range rifle, like a long-range precision rifle, like a guy like Navrich, for example. I mean, he's engaging effectively targets, like 80 meters and stuff, but that is a specific use case, right? Yeah. The average airsofter is not engaging targets like 150 meters reliably.
No.
So that being said, you still have a market for magnifiers because guys slap them on their rifles and are like, okay, well, this is going to make me accurate. I can see my shots a lot better. But one thing that happens, right, is you're only seeing through one eye. So you don't have that depth perception that you have with your two eyes.
Definitely.
So you're consistently misjudging how far your targets are, right?
Yeah. And that leads into like how I personally like to run my red dot is that, I'm running with both eyes open, and I know generally my holds for different distances. So when I come up on my target, I'm using my red dot to, obviously aim, but then with my other eye, I'm paying attention to where those BBs are actually hitting.
Yeah.
So then no matter what the situation, I can, if I'm firing one and they're going a little left, well, then I use my consistent dot as, my aiming point. And that's where it's harder to use iron sights like that, because you've got to make sure you're aligned every time, right?
Yeah.
And you might be a little inconsistent, or it's just harder to see because your rifle's there. Whereas most of our red dots are raised a little bit, right? So you're getting your rifle out of the way, and then you're able to see where your BBs are going.
Absolutely. And, not to dissuade anyone. I mean, if you really want to run a magnifier, I mean, fill your boots, right? Mm-hmm. We're not intending to basically just crap on long-range magnifiers. If that's what you want to run, absolutely. One of the key things you need to be aware of when you're using a magnifier is a concept called eye relief, which is the distance that your eye needs to be from your viewport in order to acquire a good sight picture and be able to see the full field of view of your scope. And the challenge with replica magnifiers is that eye relief is often very hit or miss.
Yes.
And so you get a magnifier, you spend like $100 on it. The real version of that magnifier is like $1,500, and you're expecting to get the same performance, and it's just never going to happen. And in my 14, 15 years of playing airsoft, I have seen one magnifier that was a 4x magnifier that had a good eye relief, and the rest of them, including the ones that I owned when I had a sniper rifle and a ghillie suit and all that jazz, all the rest of them, the eye relief was garbage, right? So you want to be really careful, and unfortunately, that's not something that you can sort of understand by just reading the Amazon review for it. You have to put it on your rifle and try it out and see, and then if something you want to do, have the wherewithal to sort of return it and buy another one and try something different.
Definitely. And like you said, I mean, if that's something you want to do, like if you want to throw a 10 times power scope on a rifle, go ahead. I mean, if that's what you find fun, or if that's what your goal is, but we're the wrong people to take advice from if that's the case.
That's right. Yeah, like we really wanted you to be as effective as possible.
Yeah.
And our belief is that, most airsofters will not be well served by running, a magnifier that's 4 times or greater. And, you could make a case for 4 times maybe in some cases, but anything beyond that really is a specific use case, and you shouldn't be taking advice from us for that kind of stuff.
Because our general philosophy for it all is that we're shooting at distances well within the range of our eyes. So we don't necessarily need a magnifier.
Yeah.
Our guns aren't accurate enough to warrant the use of that level of magnification, because it's not as if we're going to hit, something this small at 2, 3, 4, 5, 600 meters.
Yeah, that's right.
We're shooting at man-sized targets. And for us, especially a lot of places we play, you could be engaging somebody at 10 feet and then all of a sudden have to engage somebody at 150 feet. So for me, even if the magnifier did serve me in the fact that I could get a more accurate shot, with my red dot, I'm just going to come up at the guy 150 and keep shooting.
Yeah,
right. So I might shoot 3 or 4 more BBs, but I'm going to be, a hell of a lot quicker.
I think the last piece that's really important around magnifier is the drawback that you get in terms of your peripheral vision, right?
Definitely.
We've all seen the memes of people who are like looking down the scope so hard they fail to notice people around them coming right behind them, and they they mercy kill them or whatever. It's very easy to get sucked behind that scope and just look at the battlefield through your scope and not pay attention to what's immediately happening around you within 20 feet, 10 feet, right?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. You see that all the time, especially with the more magnified the optic, the more sucked in you get.
Yeah.
And also, they're heavy.
Yeah.
Right? They're heavy. They take up a lot of space on your rifle, and even just unless you've got unless you've got a really big rifle. When you even just moving your rifle around, it's space that is taken away from your peripheral, even when it's not up to your eye.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, the last piece around long-range magnifiers or like 10-power magnifiers is, you really want to have them be able to be adjusted, right? So you can zero your rifle at your proper ranges. But again, the cheaper you go, oftentimes those adjustments knobs are not where you need them to be either. Sometimes they can be like screw caps you have to take off and then, do the adjustment and put it back on, which is not super convenient. And you might not be able to get it to the zero that you want because it's meant to be used at 100 or 200 meters, and you're trying to zero at 50 or 80 meters.
Yeah.
And so you just can't adjust for something that close, right?
So I think the big takeaway from this sort of conversation and the way that we've sort of generally trended for the last couple of years especially is, if you want to add magnification for an aesthetic or for a look, you want to throw a rifle scope on your AR to complete a build, whatever, that's fine. But if you're looking to go to magnification or to a dot from irons, you really need to look at it objectively and look, is this actually helping me? Yeah. And that's like the path I went down when I put my magnifier on my rifle. First, I was the fallacy of, I bought it, so it must make me better.
Yeah,
and then
right.
I realized, no, it didn't, right? It actually took away.
Yeah, and the advantage, with airsoft is there's always a residual market, right? So if you buy a piece of kit and let's say you don't get it from like a vendor where you can return it and it doesn't work for you, there's always going to be someone out there who's willing to pick it up. And yeah, you might lose a couple bucks or whatever. But overall, if something doesn't work for you, and we've said this before, but if something doesn't work for you, you have to be honest enough with yourself to say, you know what, this isn't really working for me. I got to switch to something else. And that applies to any piece of kit, let alone an optic. Now, the challenge with optics is that they tend to be more expensive in some cases. But, definitely take the time to look at something objectively and say, is this working for me or do I need to ditch it, right?
Definitely. And if the nice thing with optics now is that pretty much everybody runs them. So if you're out at the field, just talk to people. Yeah. Right? Maybe even just try it. Ask somebody if you can use their rifle for a minute and just, it's pretty easy to tell if you like it, right away.
Yeah. And you can also, if there are people who have optics that you want to try, you could just ask to borrow the optic and slap it on your gun.
For sure.
Airsoft zeros aren't like real steel zeros. You can slap an optic on a gun and you're going to, on an airsoft gun, and you'll be pretty okay. Like, it's not going to be perfect until you get it dialed in. But for a game, you could get a really good sense. We tried that video, one of the videos that we did with the two of us working on the village. For that entire video, I had Pat's 4x magnifier Spectre locomotive sight or whatever it is. And I had that on there because I thought, it looks pretty cool. I'd have to try it. And within 5 seconds, I'm like, man, this optic is garbage. Yeah. Right? And I ditched it, right? And I'm glad I didn't buy it, and I tried it. So you have that opportunity, you should definitely avail of it. So we're going to answer a question from one of you guys now. There's a question here from Hans Adelfang, or Adelfang. I'm sorry about the pronunciation. He wants to know about LiPo batteries. So he bought a gun, and it says it's an 11.1 volt LiPo, but it doesn't say the milliamp ratings. And he wants to know, is bigger the better as long as it fits?
Yeah, so he's referring to the milliamp hour rating, which is basically going to be the capacity of your battery. So if you've got two batteries both at the same voltage, then the bigger the MAH, the more capacity or the more shots you're going to be able to have from this battery. So definitely, the bigger the MAH rating, the better. But just be very careful of size, because especially if you're fitting it in like an M4 buffer tube, you're going to be pretty limited, and it's really easy to damage the battery, especially the casing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I've had that happen with some of my batteries too, where especially as you use a LiPo, they start to puff up a little bit. Like when they get too puffy, of course, you want to discard them, but it's normal for a LiPo to sort of expand in size a little bit.
Yeah.
And very quickly you could be, if you try and force it in there, you rip the casing, you could even rip the battery. It's pretty dangerous, so you want to be very cautious about that.
I always go on the side of I'll take the smaller battery, but then I'll take two of them.
Yeah, that's right, exactly.
Because it's going to make your battery change a lot quicker as well.
And I mean, for most airsoft M4s, you shouldn't have too much trouble fitting in like a 1,000 milliamp hour or a 1,200 milliamp hour in a typical buffer stock. And just like Chris said, get two. Yeah. So thanks so much for the question, Hans. If you guys have any questions that you'd like us to answer on camera, please leave them in the comments. We're going to be doing this for all of our Let's Talk About series. So let's go back to optics for a second and sort of wrap it up. So, we talked a little bit about, our preference for red dots, right? Yeah. And over iron sights and, of course, over magnifiers. So if we're going out there and you're saying, okay, some of you guys are thinking, well, I want to get a red dot, or maybe I want to change the red dot that I have, or I want to upgrade. What are, you touched on a little bit, but let's recap. So what are the things that people are going to want to watch for?
You're going to look for, like we talked about before, brightness. I mean, I already went through that. You're going to look for something that's going to be comfortable on your rifle. Like, I prefer a taller optic because I can bring the rifle to my eye, not my eye to the optic sort of deal. And also with different rifles, I mean, certain optics aren't going to work, right? Like if you've got a G36 with a crazy rail, you might be a little limited, right? Whereas a flat top M4, you can pretty much put whatever you want on it. Yeah.
Another thing to consider as well is like the size of your optic, right? Yeah. How big is your actual, like your aperture, your aiming window, right? So on your Type 1 micros, that aperture is pretty small. Mm-hmm. And the consequence of that, though, is you can still see a lot more of your peripherals. Whereas if you look at my SRS, it's actually much chunkier, but the viewing window is quite big. Yeah. And then you can then also get optics that are very chunky and also don't have a very big... So if you think about like an ACOG, for example, there's lots of ACOGs out there, ACOG replicas, that aren't magnified. They're just a red dot. Yeah. So you got this huge optic on your gun and still only a little window, right?
Definitely. And like with the SRS and the replica aim points, you can, if you're using both eyes, you just see the dot. You don't even see the enclosure around it. But like you mentioned, with the ACOG, that's definitely something to consider.
Yeah. And, if you're looking at getting a magnifier, one of the things, can't recommend enough is making sure that you're getting as good quality as you can afford with a magnifier. If you think about how a magnifier works, it has a lot of precision-tuned lenses in there that magnify that image. And you can imagine if you just do a crappy job putting that together, you're not going to get a good result, right? Definitely. That's why, camera lenses that are very expensive tend to be better because it's precision crafting that's required. So if you really want a magnifier, make sure you look up some reviews and you set aside enough money to get a decent one. If you spend $80 on a magnifier, it's probably not going to give you the results that you want. Yeah,
for sure. And beyond magnifiers, I mean, we don't usually run any higher power scopes, and there's lots of videos out there of guys that do. So if that's your wheelhouse, sort of steer towards more helpful videos.
Yeah. The other thing, I really want to drive home, and, it's something Chris talked about at the start, you don't need to buy a real steel optic for airsoft. You sure can, don't get me wrong. If you've got disposable income and you want to get a good quality real steel optic, fill your boots. Definitely do that. But if your budget for an optic is like $100 or $150, don't let anyone sort of bully you into thinking that that's not good enough. You need to get a real steel optic. Real steel optics have a lot of features that are not useful for us in airsoft and get lost. I mean, the fact that a real steel optic retains 0 after like 1,000 rounds, well, that's great. But, we're not putting our rifles through that kind of shock and abuse every time we're pulling the trigger. Same thing Chris was saying earlier. I mean, they're meant to be effective at, 3, 4, 5, 600 meters. Well, I mean, there's no way we're shooting those distances in airsoft, right? So again, really don't be afraid to get a good quality replica and feel comfortable and, in the knowledge that it'll serve you really well on the field.
Definitely. And if you buy a good quality replica, you probably still have some cash left over for a decent mount or a protector, which is also very important.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so people go crazy with all kinds of different protectors. I just bought one that didn't fit on my T1, and then I taped it, so now it fits.
Yeah.
Right.
Some of them, like mine, like the SRS, it comes with a screw-in kill flash that is perfect for protection. In fact, it's my second kill flash because I took a BB to the first one, completely blew it out, but my optic was fine. Yeah. So I put in a new $10 kill flash, and that was the end of that. A lot of optics have that option. I know the T1s definitely do. Even aim points and stuff, you can, not aim points, I'm sorry, EOTechs, you can get kill flashes that fit perfectly in them, and they will protect your optic. You don't necessarily need one of those Lexan protectors, but those can work fine for you as well.
For sure.
It's not like in the real world. Like, if you're taking a hit to your optic in the real world, you probably have bigger concerns than the optic being destroyed. Whereas for us, it's just a game. You want to sort of protect your investment a little bit. If $10 can save you $100, that's worth it down the line.
For sure.
So guys, thank you so much for watching this video. We really hope you found it helpful. We hope you enjoyed the format and the discussion. If you have any questions or comments, please make sure to leave them below. Like I said before, if you ask us questions, we're happy to answer them both on YouTube and on our next video. And make sure to like and subscribe if you want to stay up to date with our content. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.